The glamour of bohemian life, the stage, and wealth cloud the mind. This veil becomes even thicker when seasoned with a hefty dose of alcohol, illicit substances, and vanity. The fashion, beauty, and entertainment industries have always attracted beautiful people whose outward attractiveness, however, concealed unpleasant personalities. Beautiful people fighting for their place in the sun were at the forefront of a thriving, illicit substance-fueled society in the mid-1980s. It's not surprising that many stories had sad endings, but by no means all of them were as spectacular as the events surrounding Terry Broome. All of this happened in Milan, Italy's largest city. Furthermore, the city, along with Paris and New York, was the center of world fashion. Local photo studios and agencies attracted women from all over the world during this era. In the mid-1980s, this place became especially popular with American women. Terry Broome came from the USA, hoping to become famous on the catwalk. Here, everything was in the hands of wealthy men who were keen to meet young women and lure them into their lavish lifestyles. Aspiring models who had come here to pursue their dreams. This was precisely the atmosphere Terry found herself in. In the 1980s, it was common for Milanese to use agencies' offices in New York. They could even pay for a pretty woman's plane ticket and lend her enough money to get by in her new location for a month or two to establish herself. It was risky, but worth it, because if a woman found the right path, she could earn between 200 and 4,000 a day. In Milan, you could also gain experience that enriched your portfolio and was very valuable. Thanks to recommendations and a strong resume, a model could then continue her career in Paris or New York. This is how many international stars got their start. When Terry Broome came here, she immersed herself in a fiercely competitive environment. Not only did the models have to give part of their fees to the agency that helped them relocate, every woman had to stay in shape, always and everywhere, follow a strict diet, and restrict herself in many ways to be as attractive as possible. There was no other way to compete. Indeed, only a few in the modeling business possess the looks, character, and charisma necessary to market themselves. Most simply get lost in the vast mass of applicants. Therefore, most need support and connections to become famous. In addition to beauty and charisma, a model also needs to make contacts. This means not only constant visits to studios, advertising agencies, television and production offices, and magazine photo shoots, but also immersion in the nightlife of Milan. Wealthy men who could really help moved in these circles. You could meet them in luxurious apartments, restaurants, expensive nightclubs, and country houses. When Terry arrived in Milan, she was 26 years old. She had a rather long history of failure in the modeling business behind her. In fact, before her trip to Italy, she had tried to establish herself as a model in her home country, the USA. But it hadn't worked out. The trip to Milan was another difficult and extremely controversial period in her life. She blamed her family for it, above all. Terry was one of 5 children in the Broome family. Her mother was a housewife. Her father served in the U.S. Army. She grew up in a difficult environment, as they moved frequently when her father was transferred. Terry always thought her younger sister Donna was more beautiful and popular and envied her, which weighed heavily on her. Her father was an army sergeant and raised his children like soldiers. Corporal punishment was commonplace in the family. Later, she recalled how her father would throw her against the wall and hit her, as if she were grown-ups. But he knew how to do it secretly, to inflict pain without leaving a mark. Terry always believed she was his favorite victim. At 15, she ran away from home for the first time to escape the violence. She began hitchhiking, traveling through South Carolina in the hope of finding herself. Among the people she met along the way were two motorcyclists. They initially gave her a ride, promising her a ride, but then raped her and abandoned her. Terry then reached the nearest bus stop, met another man, and tried to ask for help, but he, too, attacked her with malicious intent. Terry barely managed to fight him off. After these traumatic experiences, the 15-year-old returned home, where she received only a cold welcome. Her father declared that she deserved it, since such a thing had happened to her. The girl once again found herself in an environment reminiscent of military training. This continued until she was 18, when she made another attempt to escape her abusive father. Terry married her school friend, Mike Smith, but their relationship did not last long, and the couple later divorced. Her younger sister, Donna, was already living in New York at the time and beginning a modeling career. She was successful from the start. For Terry, this job was a dream, another way to escape the violence. She moved in with her sister, and even tried to gain a foothold in a similar industry. But the response she hoped for never materialized. Finding work was almost impossible. Even at this time, she began to envy Donna, considering herself too tall and clumsy, and her freckles bothered her. Her facial features no longer seemed as beautiful and harmonious. In light of her failures in New York, Terry began to indulge in excessive pleasures, taking refuge in alcohol, and even trying banned substances. She developed an alcohol addiction. It even got to the point where she was drinking a whole bottle a day. In 1972, Donna decided to move to Paris. Terry followed her. At first, everything looked much better than in New York. It seemed as if the young talent would soon become world famous. But after a few weeks, all the jobs were forwarded to Donna. Terry followed her like a shadow, and came away empty-handed. It turned out that she was known only as Donna's sister. In light of these failures, she returned to New York. Here, too, Terry remained in the shadows. In 1980, she even attempted to voluntarily leave the world. Fortunately, she survived this tragic incident and returned to her family in South Carolina. There, her mother tried to help her break her bad habits, but her friends from New York regularly contacted her. Terry could rarely say no to them. Instead, she met up with them again, got drunk, and had fun. Rehabilitation with her mother's help was not easy and took some time. However, after several setbacks, Terry managed to pick herself up. She found a job as a waitress and saved money for her dream. She even saved enough money to try her luck again. She decided to join Donna again, believing this was her last chance to build a modeling career. At this time, her sister was already building a modeling career in Milan. Terry decided her moment had come. She would finally achieve success. She arrived in the city on April 20, 1998. Terry had about $1,000 in cash with her, which she carried everywhere in her purse for fear of losing it. But the very next day, her purse was stolen by a pickpocket on the subway. Terry was left penniless. So, she became completely dependent on her sister again and moved into her apartment. Donna was in a relationship with a wealthy businessman at the time. Terry, with all her habits and her tendency toward disorder, intruded on her life. Donna sometimes complained that she spent so much time keeping her apartment in order. Her older sister was constantly throwing things around. She couldn't put up with this chaos for long and put Terry up in a hotel. There, wealthy businessmen hunted for women to pick up a beauty for the night. Some hoped for a more serious relationship. On her first date, Terry met a 38-year-old playboy named Claudio Catcher. He became her ticket to Milan's luxurious nightlife. Thanks to him, she visited all the city's sights and dined in the most expensive cafes, restaurants, and trendy bars. but she didn't really make much progress in the modeling business. However, success and the catwalk quickly faded into the background when Terry was confronted with her old enemy, her addictions. Here, for the first time, she saw a whole tray of white powder being passed around by the guests. She quickly became addicted to illegal substances, but, as before, she didn't believe she had any problems. Donna was indeed successful at this time. She got good contracts, earned a lot of money, traveled with her wealthy boyfriend, and visited expensive restaurants, but limited herself to one glass of alcohol. Her sister, on the other hand, was a regular at such establishments during this time. In addition to alcohol, she constantly consumed illegal substances in large quantities. For days, she dreamed of finally getting a good job, and at night, she was high when she was transferred from one bed to another. However, she once again managed to convince herself that she would succeed. Terry told one of her friends that even if this didn't happen, she would simply find a rich man and live a life of luxury. This seemed realistic to her when she met a wealthy man named Giorgio Rotti. He owned a jewelry store on one of Milan's main streets. Unlike others, he treated Terry well. However, this man, too, was addicted like most wealthy Milanese. According to the young woman, he sometimes drove a car and took illegal substances. Despite this, he behaved much better than others. Giorgio even introduced her to his parents, which in Italy is a sure sign that a man is serious. At the beginning of June 1998, she finally moved in with Giorgio and was very excited about this event, which she often told Donna about. However, all this couldn't go on forever. Terry Broome and Francesco D'Alessio first met in the spring of 1981. At that time, both were so immersed in this dissolute lifestyle that the young woman later recalled it as a time like dancing with death. The main problem was the systematic consumption of illegal substances, pills and alcohol. Francesco D'Alessio was a typical representative of Milanese bohemians, a very rich, handsome man, but not one who had earned his fortune himself. His father, Carlo D'Alessio, owned the most successful stud farm for thoroughbred racehorses in Italy. Francesco owed his wealth to this man. Of course, like most representatives of the golden youth, he appreciated it little. Instead of maintaining and increasing his family's wealth, he simply spent his money. Francesco surrounded himself with wealth, luxury goods, and wealthy friends. He always surrounded himself with models and was married to one. In fact, fate decreed that he would even spend the last seconds of his life in the company of models. Not only did he come from a wealthy family himself, but he also had just such friends. Among them were Guido Borgi, whose family manufactured refrigerators, the son of the powerful financier Carlo Cabassi, and Umberto Caproni, who was well known in the aviation industry. They cared little for any kind of work, but an evening was considered wasted if they weren't at a popular party. Terry Broome still lived in a hotel in the city center. There were 2 rooms there, usually rented to women or occupied by men on the prowl. It was constantly teeming with wealthy people, looking for a woman to spend the night with. Most didn't mind. They all hoped to make contacts and do business this way. It was the easiest way and practically always worked. In the lobby, one could meet millionaires from all walks of life. The young men usually wooed their chosen ones. Quite generous. They showered them with gifts and money. But some were so direct that they almost took the women by force. No one noticed that they saw this as their only opportunity for advancement. Some even found husbands, but most expected a less than enviable fate. As long as the models were young and beautiful, they met wealthy men, received gifts and a touch of fame, but ultimately, they were obsolete and uninteresting. In any case, the stakes were high. Many didn't realize that they were paying for all this with their intimacy. They believed that for this price, they would rise to the top. When Terry Broome entered this milieu, she had no idea that the rules of the game were largely dictated by the mafia. The gangsters were little interested in the model's success. All that mattered to them was the money. The underworld controlled most of the bars frequented by the women and their admirers. Of course, they were very familiar with the golden youth, who brought them huge profits. At that time, Milan was the true criminal capital of Italy. Many compared it to Chicago in the 1920s. The only difference was that the entrepreneurs of that era made their fortunes selling illegal substances. In Milan, as many journalists said, money flowed freely. Illegal substances of all kinds were available on almost every corner. It was primarily the golden youth who bought them. One of Francesco D'Alessio's close friends, with whom he regularly met in clubs and discos, was Joe Moserati. The man was a well-known gangster and had the notorious reputation of being the king of black market dealers. It is not surprising that Terry Broome, who immersed herself in this bohemian life, also began using illegal substances. They first met Francesco at a trendy party she attended on the night of May 6th at the home of an influential financier. The party took place at the villa of a wealthy businessman in Casarec. He was known for organizing elegant and beautiful parties that could quietly turn into full-blown orgies with illegal substances and a whole host of models. This time, the orgy began after the man's assistants had retired. He prepared a whole tray of prohibited substances. Terry consumed some of them and lost control of herself. According to her, that very night, the party organizer and Claudio Catcher exploited her vulnerability and raped her. They later denied all allegations and claimed they had a consensual threesome. Francesco also wanted to participate, but fell asleep on the floor before anything got done. When the man woke up and learned that Terry had participated in a group sex orgy, he was upset. Francesco found Terry, woke her, and demanded sex from her. However, she had already regained consciousness, and afraid that her boyfriend might find out about the act, refused and left. Francesco was apparently not one of those people who could accept rejection. From that point on, he never missed an opportunity to show her his negative attitude. It was difficult to hide from him. They moved in similar circles and met often. At every opportunity, the man made hurtful remarks and unpleasant suggestions. Terry repeatedly complained to her friends about his behavior. It looked like stalking, but everyone thought they should just ignore him. He would stop in time. For Terry, his actions became a daily nightmare. It only got worse. Little by little, Francesco began to insult the young woman. She couldn't understand why he wouldn't leave her alone, not realizing that the man himself was in a similar situation. Like the failed model, he was deeply involved in illegal substances, and was therefore increasingly losing control of himself. To everyone who knew Francesco D'Alessio, he was a wealthy, charming 40-year-old man. Shortly before the time of these events, he had a beautiful wife and healthy children. He was successful in everything he did, and was extremely knowledgeable with horses. Only his father knew more about them. Yet Francesco had always been rude and stubborn, incredibly spoiled since childhood, which worsened when he encountered the world of illegal substances. He couldn't accept the word no. He once even punched an American woman in a nightclub because she refused to sleep with him. As he became addicted, he began behaving openly and dangerously. He wrecked cars, regularly slept in his clothes right in hotel lobbies, rarely shaved and barely washed, and made public scenes from which only money and relationships could save him. Women held a special place in his life, but many believed he had never truly loved. Some friends recounted that Francesco had developed several sadistic tricks he used to make models fall in love with him, then abandon them just to hurt them. As the man's life began to fall apart, he grew to hate women. He could abandon even the most beautiful companion on a whim, without explanation. Gambling, which Francesco also loved, became a kind of synonym for his pursuit of self-destruction. By the time he met Terry Broome, he was already convinced that nothing in life was important except pleasure. His favorite saying was, "Life is a bet I'm willing to lose." On June 25, 1998, Terry, along with her beloved Giorgio Rotti, met her sister and her sister's boyfriend. They were sitting at a popular restaurant. There, Terry noticed Francesco. She sensed he was about to misbehave again and wanted to prevent it. She persuaded the whole group to go to another establishment, certain he would ruin everything again. But they didn't make it in time. At 8:00 a.m., Francesco came over and greeted the group with another unpleasant remark. Terry had already consumed a considerable amount of alcohol. When she saw him, she went to the ladies' room, hoping he would lose interest and leave. Instead, Francesco waited until she came out and then walked around the table where the group was sitting, making awkward jokes about Terry's penchant for group sex. Terry's friend didn't seem to fall for these provocations. Soon, everyone left the club. On the way home, however, the friend, with a disgruntled expression, asked Terry to return his gifts. She realized that the scene with Francesco could ruin her life, which had just begun, unaware that her friend had actually behaved this way several times before. When she got home, the man went to sleep, but Terry couldn't. She was too excited to distract herself. She searched the closets in the apartment, hoping to find games that would calm her down. But instead, she found a .38 caliber revolver. Then a terrible plan occurred to her. She called Francesco, pretending to be Diana, and asked to meet him. He agreed, and she drove to the specified address. The man was not alone in his villa, but in the company of another woman. He immediately suggested to Terry, whom he did not recognize at first, that she go into the bedroom and sleep with him, but she refused. He then made several unpleasant jokes in his style. Unwilling to tolerate this any longer, she took out her revolver and fired in his direction. The first bullet missed. The man lunged at her, but with the second shot, she hit him in the chest. Francesco managed to grab his attacker by the wrist. They fell to the ground together and began to struggle. Terry pulled the trigger 3 more times. The last bullet hit him in the temple. In the last minutes of his life, the man recognized the offended woman and realized that this was her revenge. When she noticed that the victim was no longer moving, she stood up, put the gun in her handbag, and left, after had calmed the victim's companion, who had been sitting in the next room the whole time. Terry explained that she didn't want to kill anyone, but had to teach Francesco a lesson, and that she had nothing to fear. As soon as the failed model candidate left, the woman woke Francesco's neighbor, who lived in the penthouse, and told him that Francesco was dying. While she called the ambulance and the police, the man carefully removed all traces of substances. He also approached several friends and told them about the incident. At that point, the victim was still breathing, but he only had a few minutes to live. When she returned home on the morning of June 26, 1984, Terry told her boyfriend what had happened. He reloaded the gun and put it back in the drawer. Terry called her sister, who immediately started screaming that she had been causing nothing but trouble since her arrival. Terry then began packing her suitcase, while her partner wiped the blood off her shoes, and then drove her to the airport. She had a return ticket to New York, but didn't want to return to the U.S., so she flew to Switzerland instead. There, the fugitive settled into a small apartment across from the police station. It wasn't long before they started looking for her and intending to arrest her. This wasn't difficult. Eventually, the woman was put out for questioning, found, and extradited to Milan. Journalists welcomed Terry Broome like a star. The Milanese public was shocked by what had happened, but not surprised. The murdered man had a bad reputation, and everyone knew that such an end was inevitable. But what the American model had done shocked everyone. Terry had no idea what a sensation her crime had caused. She immediately declared that she didn't mean to kill Francesco. She spent the next 2 years in prison awaiting trial. There, she became addicted to a drug prescribed by a member of the medical staff to help her overcome her other addictions. Terry attempted suicide twice, after which she was transferred to a more modern prison east of Milan. Here, she began to recover again. Terry Broome met a former terrorist who helped her improve her Italian and made life in prison easier for her. In addition to her cellmate, her mother and sister Donna also supported her. Remarkably, the murderer even benefited from journalists' interest in the sensational crime. Terry did indeed become famous, as she had dreamed, albeit not in the way she had hoped. When the trial took place, it became clear that the public was on the murderer's side. The 28-year-old Terry was seen as a victim of the men from the Milanese beau, whom she blamed for her addiction. Her boyfriend was also charged, but received a short sentence of only a few months in prison. Her boyfriend, Giorgio, had put Terry in an uncomfortable situation, and after a meeting with Francesco, demanded the return of the gifts. In doing so, he had practically driven her to commit the crime. The trial resembled a theatrical performance. One of the lawyers even drew applause and tears from the audience when he portrayed Terry as the victim. The defense attorney claimed that Terry suffered from a temporary psychosis caused by the abuse of alcohol and illegal substances, which her friends in the clique had plied her with. Francesco's ex-wife stated that she did not hold the murderer responsible for her actions. She blamed the illegal substances for taking her husband. Terry herself stated that she did not mean to kill Francesco, but merely tried to scare him into leaving her alone. But that didn't work, and now she could do nothing to make up for his death. Instead, she wanted to try to change her own life. After 8 hours of deliberation, the jury convicted her of murder. Second-degree murder with mitigating circumstances. The murderer was sentenced to 12 years in prison, of which she had already served 3. Her lawyers attempted to appeal the sentence, but were unsuccessful. Journalists spoke to her several times. She seemed even more satisfied with her situation in prison than with her free life in Milan. Terry started every morning by making pottery, learned Italian, taught English to local women, and worked in the prison garden, for which she received about $100 a month. She even broke free from her addictions and looked tanned and fit. Terry spoke to the press repeatedly, stating that she had no regrets about the bohemian life she had left behind. She believed she had met much better people in prison and no longer aspired to a modeling career. In 1999, Terry was released from prison. Her sister picked her up, and they left together. At first, she didn't plan to return to the USA, but instead tried to build a new life in Italy. But it didn't work out, and she later returned home. Terry leads a secluded life, starting from scratch and avoiding the cameras. Almost nothing is known about her life in freedom. Thanks for watching, and take care.